Hi guys, Lee Howard again. I'm doing part 2 of chapter 13 in our book for CO105. Okay, so one question a lot of people have about the media and how people react to the media is, are opinions really malleable? Do they shift quickly or are they gradual? The answer seems to depend on how drastic an event might have been and what the public mood is. Some opinions shift gradually, while others can crystallize in just a few hours. For instance, after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, most people before Pearl Harbor in 1941, were not in favor of getting involved in World War II. A few hours after the attack, public opinion shifted quite quickly. So gradual shifts are the hardest thing to measure and understand, but we do know that there are some ways, there are certain ways that people come to their opinion. One way is role modeling, and another is stereotypes. These are two filters that people use to think about our world. With the role modeling, we match our views to the people we admire, whether they be sports figures or movie stars. Role modeling can be used for good purposes, such as an actor always buckling up when driving a car, but it also can be seen in a negative light, such as outbreaks of violence after showing violent movies. So another way of looking at social situations is through stereotyping, the tendency to simplify images of certain groups based on their looks, jobs, and other factors. Stereotypes allow the media to simplify messages so they are communicated quickly, but the result can be social injustices. Back in the 1970s, African Americans were largely portrayed on network television in a demeaning light, and some would say the same thing is happening with Arab Americans today, who are often given roles as terrorists and the like. Media are usually more aware of avoiding stereotypes today, but they still inevitably slip in. Mass media in the past, as cringeworthy as it sometimes was, often had the effect of being culturally unifying at the same time. With television dominating the media landscape in the 1960s through the 1980s, and only 3 networks providing news coverage, people had a narrow prism through which to view the world. Events such as the moon landing, as well as President Kennedy and Martin Luther King's assassination, brought these subjects to a wide audience, and they could either bring a negative response, or they could actually lead to a sharing of common values. And even negative things, through negative acts, we often can also share our human values too, our reverence for life and that sort of thing, even in a bad situation, can sort of shine through. Still, books sort of remain the primary repository of our culture, but more and more these days, moving images are helping us convey emotions, and that's really the thing that drives a lot of the rhetoric today and a lot of the issues today. So films have really been a very powerful force for the historical transmission of values. We used to pass stories around campfires and in temples and churches. Now, largely, we do it, in front of a screen of some sort, either TV screen, movie screen, or these days even the internet, the computer screen. American films have been denigrated as a form of cultural imperialism, and they sometimes are thought to have an insidious effect on other cultures, changing them to make them more like our own. But as American and European businesses extended their reach in the 1990s, there was a lot of worry that America was going to kind of take over, and Europe was going to take over the culture of the world. You have MTV and ESPN leaping overseas and immediately having a lot of effect on the way people viewed the world. However, eventually other cultures caught up. You have the success of Bollywood in India, against the Hollywood of our country, and even Latin American TV networks are now competing very, very successfully against American TV networks like CNN. So I think a lot of these countries are going to have the last word, and there's an idea that we're going to have more cross-fertilization of cultures as we go along, which leads to this sort of idea of transcultural enrichment, in which we all learn from the experiences of others, and I think that's likely to be the future of the world at this point. I don't think any culture is going to dominate. People are going to pick and choose what seems interesting to them and relevant. Still, suspicion persists about mass media effects, especially when it comes to advertising. Brainwashing is a huge concern, and certainly there's been a lot of brainwashing these days on probably both sides of many issues. The idea that propaganda could be used to influence the views of groups, has been understood for many, many years. I think it was most telling in Nazi Germany that, this idea that propaganda could kind of brainwash people, first came about, and it did have a tremendous effect, and it did lead to a lot of people believing things that, we now know were unbelievable. So people have also been influenced by the idea of Sigmund Freud, who believed that most people have repressed motivations and impulses, and the idea led to advertising pioneer Ernest Dichter looking into depth interviewing to try to find the motivations of people. So the idea was to gear messages to people's basic motivations. Unfortunately, early on, this led to a lot of campaigns that exploited sexual images, again in keeping with Freud's theories of repressed sexual impulses. Sneaky messages known as subception can sometimes influence behavior, but it's unclear whether subliminal messages flashed before the eye, too quickly for the eye to really discern what is going on, has really a strong enough effect outside limited circumstances to affect behavior. There's been some indication that you can get some changes of behavior in laboratories, but no real indication that you can somehow send subliminal messages that are going to force people to act certain ways. Okay, so that's the end of number 2.